This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I would like to welcome you to 1 month to a better board. In this month of February 2017, I'm going to go through and do a series of podcasts talking about making your board more effective. I'm going to start out with the legal requirements that a board has around compliance, move into why a board needs a compliance committee and compliance expertise at the board. I'm going to talk about how the CCO should report to the board and questions that a board compliance committee should ask of a CCO. We're going to take a look at some government guidance and business experience around compliance in the board. We're going to talk about some board failures. We're going to talk about how boards do investigations. We're going to look at boards and internal controls. I'm going to end with a series of specific questions that a board should ask of its chief compliance officer. And on my final day, I will detail 20 questions that every board should ask of its chief compliance officer. Each day, I will give you a short 10-minute or so podcast with 3 key takeaways for that day, and I will accompany each podcast with text that you can use. The 20 questions that I referenced will be provided on the final day of February. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey to 1 month to a more effective board. This is Tom Fox. Welcome to day 3 of 1 month to a better board. Today, the Board of Directors Compliance Committee. Under the U.S. Sentencing Guidelines, a Board of Directors must exercise reasonable oversight on the effectiveness of a company's compliance program. The Department of Justice Prosecution Standards pose the following questions. Do the Board of Directors exercise independent review of a company's compliance program? And are the directors provided sufficient information to enable the exercise of that independent judgment? Moreover, the FCPA Guidance requires a CCO, that's Chief Compliance Officer, to have direct access to the board or an appropriate subcommittee of the board. The guidance also requires a tangible commitment from top levels of an organization, including a board of directors, that the company will create an ethical culture. At the board of directors level, a board compliance committee can devote itself exclusively to non-financial compliance, such as anti-corruption compliance as required by the FCPA. While many companies have fulfilled these obligations through an audit committee, I believe the better approach is to have a separate compliance committee. The reason is clear, that a compliance committee has become not only central to any well-run business, but it's critical to overseeing a wider variety of risks than the typical audit committee has experience with, which usually is only aimed towards financial risks. A compliance committee on the board should be the primary means by which the board of directors monitors and oversees the company's compliance program, compliance reporting, and disclosure as appropriate. It also oversee a company's relationship with its outside auditors who may be looking at a compliance program, or indeed outside counsel who may be brought in for assistance. Audit committee members need to have certain compliance literacy and compliance expertise. They should be comprised of persons with sufficient understanding of compliance to enable them to act effectively to oversee the integrity of the company's compliance reporting process and any statements that the compliance function may be required to make. They should be able to read and understand a compliance program. They should be able to read and understand the reporting that a compliance program engages in or develops. I would suggest that one member should qualify as a compliance expert that I'll talk about in a subsequent podcast. The compliance expertise requirement is generally fulfilled by a committee member with a background in compliance that permits the board to conclude in good faith that the director is capable of understanding the most complex issues around compliance that are likely to be encountered in the course of the company's business. A board compliance committee should provide regular reports to the board of directors as a whole. And the directors should satisfy themselves that the compliance committee, management, and all outside professionals are satisfied with the compliance condition of the company as they are presented. The compliance committee should get regular reports from management, the chief compliance officer, and probably even the internal auditor to provide a reasonable assurance that the internal compliance controls of the company are adequately structured to allow the company to fulfill its obligations under the FCPA for having an effective set of internal controls. In addition, the Board Compliance Committee should oversee management's design and implementation of policies and procedures to control compliance risks. Audit committees should discuss guidelines and policies to govern the process by which risk is assessed and managed at a corporation. This means that while the board as a whole has a responsibility to understand and oversee risks, it is the detailed responsibility of the compliance committee to provide information so that the board can exercise good judgment in everything it does. While there are some risks, such as compensation risks, which may be the responsibility of the full board, there are certainly some that would be appropriate for the compliance committee. While risk management is a particularly complex and indeed new area that many boards may have to consider, if the company puts this in the compliance function, I think it has a much better chance to manage it adequately. So what should the Board Compliance Committee begin its inquiry with? I would suggest the following question. How do we know it's working? In other words, is the company's compliance program living up to the hallmarks of an effective compliance program in the eyes of the government? At this point, I would lay out 4 specific areas of inquiry, and we're going to go into these in much more detail in subsequent podcasts. The Board Compliance Committee should obtain information to process on the compliance process to carry out the compliance function rather than the details of the specific compliance issues. They need to understand that there is a single individual or internal corporate discipline keeping track of the compliance function and making sure that it is properly handled. A board needs to understand, or the compliance committee needs to understand, that there is a system in place that keeps track of compliance requirements. A key area of Board Compliance Committee interest should be in around hotlines or other internal reporting mechanisms. Here, a compliance committee needs to know the details of both inbound issues and outbound responses thereto. On the inbound side, this means details about who answers the reports that come in via email or phone, how this information is triaged, and in what time frame. It also requires an understanding of whether the reporting system is truly anonymous with no use of caller ID or GPS tracking. The next series of questions deals with the responses to any information which comes to the attention of the company, such as basic inquiries about how reports are classified and routed. Who gets notified for what types of calls? How the investigation process is divided among the various functions, or is it outsourced? Finally, what is the response rate and the response time for reports that come in? A Board Compliance Committee must know who is accountable and responsible for each segment of the compliance program. They should obtain assurance that the compliance function has developed a charter that makes it clear to them where the obligations fall across management so it can assess accountability. While it is true an effective Board Compliance Committee will allow management and the compliance officer to do his or her job running the business, they understand that it is their job to set long-term strategy. Strategic planning is another area that is well suited for oversight by a Board Compliance Committee. For such a committee to be both effective and informed, it must have an appreciation of where the corporate compliance function stands, not only at the present moment, but also has a strategic plan for how compliance and ethics can continue to grow. My colleague Stephen Martin, a partner at Arnold & Porter, has long advocated a 1-, 3-, and 5-year compliance plan. However, a board compliance committee should demand that the compliance function be nimble enough to respond to new information or new actions such as mergers or acquisitions, divestitures, or other external events. If a dynamic changes, you want to get your board's attention on the changes which may need to happen in your compliance program. So what are the 3 key takeaways for today? The first is that the Board Compliance Committee exists to provide oversight and assist the Chief Compliance Officer in compliance function, not to substitute its judgment for that of the CCO. Number 2, the committee should work to hold the CCO accountable to hit appropriate metrics. And number 3, the Compliance Committee is ideal for leading the effort not only around risk management as a whole, but also around strategic planning. This is Tom Fox. I hope you have enjoyed day 3 of 1 Month to a Better Board, and that you will join me tomorrow on day 4. This is Tom Fox. Thank you for joining for today's episode of 30 Days to a Better Board. This series is based on my seminal work, Doing Compliance, Design, Create, and Implement an Effective Compliance Program. It's available from Compliance Week, and you can check it out on their website, complianceweek.com. I hope you will join me tomorrow for another episode.